Okay, so kind of to recap. So far, in the evolution we've talked about, we've picked up some relationships, very, very long-standing relationships that our ancestors have had with plants. And this is another way you can look at, so what am I going to plant in my food forest? Well, what might the best relationships be? Plants offer the following things to us. You can read the list. I think the most important is food. You know, food starts with plants. Plants make energy available to animals. But, you know, you also provide medicines. They provide a nice environment. You know, they provide that shade tree. And we need to think about, well, what those plants need in return for these things. And what we already talked about, they want to be dispersed. They want their seeds out there. A lot of plants, root vegetables in particular, like the soil disturbed. They like the soil aerated. They appreciate that because that's what they're adapted to, and that's how they can get a one-up on their competition. Grass and trees kind of compete with root vegetables. We also concentrate the nutrients, and we do that as animals primarily with our waste. And I like to point out that the fruit relationship is commonly seen as being based on dispersal, right? Like the reason that a mulberry tree creates mulberries for starlings is so that the starlings will take the seeds elsewhere. There's another important relationship going on here. By attracting all the starlings to the tree, it's raining fertilizer now. So we need to also remember that aspect of the plant-animal relationship. And you know, on a global scale, the plants are also providing the gas that we need for our metabolism, and they are providing, and we are providing the gas that they need for theirs. It's a really good partnership. And I discussed this earlier, that the plants that are going to be our best friends are not going to be the dominant plants. The dominant plants don't need our help. We're looking for plants that need help to survive. And so, unfortunately, that means that we're not going to eat like red cedar trees. If we're looking to feed ourselves, we want to form relationships with things like apple trees and Jerusalem artichokes, things like that. So we need to be wary. We want to have a good relationship with the whole environment, but just like in a human community, some of your friends are going to be closer than others, and some people are going to be a better friend to you than others. So to further drive home this idea of the strength of the relationship to plants and animals, I want to talk about how we got food in the first place. So squirrels, for instance, created acorns. They've been co-evolving for millions of years. Over time, because the squirrel stashes the nuts and helps the oak tree disperse, the oak tree has favored the squirrel. It wants to create an acorn that the squirrel will grab and disperse. And so this relationship they have has created a whole food. And it's created a food that we can also eat. Humans can eat acorns. And in fact, in California, they had villages of up to 1,000 people supported without agriculture, primarily on acorns. And if you want a good example of how animals kind of create their own food through relationships with plants, look at a place where there are no large mammals. And one of the best examples I can think of is Hawaii. So in Hawaii, I think the biggest native mammal they had there was some little rat thing. So there was never any incentive for plants, for instance, to make fruits that were very big. If the animals you have available to relate with are very small, you're going to create small fruits. And so the native vegetation of Hawaii actually has very little to eat, even though today we know that it's kind of a fruitarian paradise with bananas and mangoes and everything growing everywhere. But those aren't native. Those are brought by people. There wasn't much to eat there, and I've done a lot of research into the ethnobotany of the native plants there, and they're pretty much restricted to things like the inner pith of ferns and really tiny berries. Then big mammals show up, right? Pigs, people. Now the forests there are full of food. It's, ready for us to eat. Mangoes and breadfruit and coconuts. So my point is that we rely not only on the plants, but also on these other animals to get these relationships going for us. So kind of an opposite story. So people came to North America 14,000 years ago, and they were the first people there. Yet they found tons of food they could eat. Very different from the situation with wine. And the reason was there were other animals that they could kind of fill the niche up. They could take over for the squirrel and utilize the acorn niche. They could take over from the bear and fill the berry niche. They could take over from the gopher, kind of fill the soil disturbance, root harvesting niche. And that's one reason why we've been able to spread over so much of the world, is because we can kind of fill the shoes of other creatures, which have created these relationships ready-made for us, which I think is really cool. So kind of back to our evolution. After the Australopithecines, we have Homo habilis, started making tools 2.5 million years ago. And we were getting to be better hunters, and we were starting to spread out. And when you're a hunter, you can live anywhere. There are mammals. You don't have to spend time, learning about what plants you can eat, because all meat's pretty much the same. You don't have to worry about meat being poisonous. You can eat an elephant or an armadillo and be fairly confident you're going to be all right. Really cool. Homo erectus occupied northeastern China 1.6 million years ago, and northeastern China today is very similar to our region right here in the inland northwest. So we've got a long history in the temperate regions. We shouldn't think of ourselves as a tropical species. Later, there were other innovations. Other people went to colonize the temperate world. Then our species appears. We had a lot of technological innovations that allowed us to spread even further. We developed really complicated projectile weapons like the atlatl illustrated there. It's a way to throw a spear. The mastodons and mammoths were hunted with atlats. And as hunters, we colonized the world. This map here shows the different times we colonized a different continent, and colonized the world really quick. Up here is Columbus. They were already here. And what I think is cool is that Central Asia, a climate more like our own, it's kind of semi-arid. It's on the border between forest and steppe. Was occupied much earlier than Europe, which is a more mesic environment like the eastern woodlands or the northwest coast, which might indicate that environments like ours are better habitat for people than are the deep, dark woods of other regions. So here's kind of all that in review. This is from a really great website about the Paleolithic diet called Beyond Vegetarianism, and kind of goes over some of those dietary shifts, just to make it clear what we eat. You guys want to take some notes? Just read the website. Oh, yeah. Okay, and modern Homo sapiens was the first hominid, we think, to colonize North America. It showed up 14,000 years ago, probably crossed from the land bridge we were taught about in school. Interesting. They were leaving Europe right as Europe was developing a lot of social complexity that would develop here only later, like sedentism. This is bows and arrows, pottery, They left that behind right as all that was kind of starting up, and as I'll show you, they lived a very different lifestyle when they got here. But, you know, I want to sympathize with the Native American view that they'll tell you we've always been here. We're part of this land, and here are some scientific facts that back that up. Primates have been here a long time. There's either fossil primate beyond the fossil beds down in Oregon. We talked about earlier how a lot of early primates and primate-like mammals walked this very continent. They were here. And even our reptilian ancestors walked this very rock when Pangea was conjoined still. So, were we colonizing this place really, or were we just coming back? Had we just been away from home for a while? Going back to the first North Americans, Clovis. So these guys, as I already mentioned, were able to colonize the world as hunters, and North America had a heck of a lot of creatures to hunt. We had, you know, the classic example is mammoths, but we also had other large animals like camels and horses, giant sloths, and a giant armadillo-like thing called a glyptodon. And the Clovis people specialized in hunting them. And one local Clovis, well, it's actually a pre-Clovis find. It's 13,800 years old. It's the Manus mastodon kill, and it's over in Sequin. And pretty cool that those animals were here. And long enough, recently enough ago that you can still find the bones. And they're not fossilized bones; they're just preserved bones. The funny thing about Clovis culture was it spread really fast, and they were very mobile. They were presumably following these big herds, and their culture only lasted 300 or 500 years. So they very quickly kind of burned themselves out, and the consensus from the scientific community is that's because they driven a lot of these large animals to extinction, and they may have had other stresses, but human hunting certainly contributed. So, mammoths and mastodons are gone. What do we do now? Well, we become the Folsom and Plano culture. Folsom culture specialized in hunting the biggest animal left. It was a kind of bison called Bison antipus, which is actually ancestral to modern bison, but it was bigger and had broader horns, and its head was higher. It had different ecological habits. They believed that these animals didn't live in big herds like plains bison do today. They lived in smaller herds. They were a little more solitary. But our hunting of them probably changed their behavior and even their physiology. Over time, our hunting pressure kind of shaped the bison we know today. Their horns got shorter so they could live in tighter groups. Their heads got lower because competition for forage in a big herd became very intense. And they got smaller because we've been singling out the big ones. And there's evidence of bison hunting even here in Washington. We generally don't associate bison with our state, but they did live here during the Pleistocene, and were only recently expatriated. Okay, so I want to talk about animals as kind of an original wealth. And we are very proud of inventions like fabric and modern homes. But I like to point out that all these things we were forced to invent as substitutes when we lost the game. And so the list on the right are all the things that we invented and perhaps had to invent when animal materials became rare. And the other great thing about animal products is that we kind of evolved as hunters, and a lot of our technology did too.